All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I am so excited for our webinar today. My name is Zuli Marabona. I'm Executive Vice President with KWPMC. I'm delighted to be here with you. I'm joined by my colleague, Alex Martin, along with our expert panelists for today's webinar. Today's discussion is about communication and conflict. I know that none of us ever have any of that, right? So it's absolutely not a concern for us. So with our discussion today, this is something that every professional in our experience related to conflict, it can happen in team conversations, it could happen in client interactions, vendor relationships, board meetings, leadership discussions, and everyday workplace communication. While conflict can feel uncomfortable, and we know that it absolutely can, it's also a natural part of our day to day. It's definitely part of working with people. When handled well, it can lead to greater understanding, stronger relationships, and more effective collaboration. Before we dive in, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. As always, please remember that we enjoy when you interact with us throughout our session. So please remember to join and ask through our Q&A chat. Also remember that anything that we covered today is for purposes of our webinar and general conversation. Anything related specifically to your associations or any specific subject matter, you should consult with your individual professionals or the association council for your association. With that said, we hope that you enjoy today's session, and I will go ahead and turn it over to Alex. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Zuli. Good afternoon, everyone. Alex Martin. I'm a partner over at KWPMC, and I'm excited to be part of today's session. Today's session is communication and conflict are closely connected. Conflict often begins not because people want tension, but because something is misunderstood, unclear, delayed, assumed, or communicated in the ways that does not land as intended. And we all hear different things. It's human. It's just human nature to sometimes hear something different. So today, our goal is to provide practical guidance to recognize conflict early, communicating with clarity and professionalism, listening more effectively, and creating productive dialogue when viewpoints differ. Okay. So today, I'm really excited. We have Omar Malik, principal attorney over at KSN Law Firm, and our one and only John Ansa, district manager over at KWPMC. Omar, let's start with you.
Welcome.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Alex. So I'm Omar Malik. I'm a principal at Kovich Schiffer Nesbitt. Our firm is in Florida, Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin, and Texas. And all I do all day, every day is I represent condominium and community associations, which means, my practice consists of helping boards and managers navigate exactly the kind of conflict we're going to talk about today, owner disputes, contentious meetings, and the moments where communication breakdowns make their way to my desk and it becomes a legal one. So happy to be here.
Thank you, Omar. We're really excited to have you on today. John?
Alex, thank you. John Ansa, I'm a district manager for the Southwest Florida region with KWPMC. Prior to that, I've spent 18 years in luxury hospitality operations in a variety of on-property executive roles. And I'm excited to still be in operations and still be involved in our property. So I feel like it gives me a current insight onto what are some of the current challenges when it comes to communication and conflict.
Thank you, John. And
Welcome.
thank you both
Welcome
for
to both
carving
of
out some
you.
time today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Great to be here. Omar, great to be here with you.
Likewise.
Thank you. Thank you both. All right, let's to get things off here. Let's begin with poll questions. We want to get an understanding of how, where your communication breakdown is. In question number one, you're going to see in your experience most often cause communication to break. What most often causes communication to break down? If you can answer that question, that help us a lot during this discussion. And question number two is which communication challenge creates the most friction in your day to day?
So much silence. We're all very
Second there.
concentrated waiting.
People are still,
Waiting for the data.
oh yeah. All right, so it's exactly what we thought, right? So 30% is poor communication, 10% lack of trust, and 15% delayed follow-up. And then we got a 45% misaligned expectations.
Okay.
Right? And then which communication challenge creates? Well, I didn't ask. That was for the question in your experience, what most often causes communication breakdown, right? And then question number 2, which communication challenge creates the most friction in your day-to-day? 47% is difficult residents. 42% is challenging board members. And 11% is email and text misunderstandings. Interesting.
Yes, very.
So, all right. Omar, let's start with you. What trends, what are you seeing out there in board meetings? What are you seeing in the world of communication and understanding? What are you seeing out there now that's creating this environment of lack of trust, lack of understanding?
I think that when I talk to other people in the industry or people within the firm, it seems like, and maybe this stems back to COVID, where there was this push to virtual meetings. I'm seeing a lot of, there's a lot more Zoom meetings, which is great because it's generated more attendance because it's a lot easier to tune in to the board meeting. But it's also generated, I'd say, a flood, or maybe it's emboldened people to say things virtually that they may not step up or stand up and say in person at a board meeting. So I think it's
Great
increased.
point, Omar.
I call them the
True.
keyboard warriors, right? Where people will say it's very easy to say nasty things when you're typing them from behind a keyboard anonymously or with, your name attached, but you're not having to face these residents face to face. And that really just doesn't serve anyone well, right? Because you can very easily say hurtful or mean things that certain people have thicker skins than others. And it really can sow, just a bad environment within the association as a whole by firing off a quick message from your keyboard. So I think that's generated a lot more conflict. I think that translates to more conflict. It can lead to more distrust within communities because I see it all the time, including at a meeting I was at a few weeks ago, where all of a sudden you have people who are in the chat that are riling each other up, and all of a sudden the focus goes away from conducting actual board business and it almost goes into the board having to do damage control to address these legitimate or oftentimes illegitimate concerns raised by a group of disgruntled owners. So I think that becomes counterproductive when you have owners that are just focusing on the wrong issues,
Such a
or
distraction.
it becomes a distraction and they're levying all sorts
Yeah.
of accusations that completely sidetrack the association's meetings.
Agree. John, what are you seeing in your world?
Omar makes a great point. So what I see is it's from a property management side, it comes down to presence, right? So your presence on a property. There's a term in architecture, it's called patina. It's kind of the natural look of a building. Well, every property has a patina. It has a different feel. They're all unique. And the residents bring that unique feel. So it's up to the property management team and those employees in that team to have that presence to understand how the communication flows on a property. But they can't do that from, as Omar said, they can't do that from a Teams meeting. They can't do that from a virtual meeting. They need to be in the space, interacting with residents on a daily basis, face to face when possible. So when we talk about conflict and communication, if you're there on site and you're involved and you have this presence, you have a better opportunity to engage and hopefully avoid conflict or strengthen your communication.
And John, to your point, I went to a meeting in person a few weeks ago that was for the exact purpose of what you just identified. There had been Zoom meetings and the comments were getting out of control. And so the board's like, you know what? Let's have an in-person meeting. We all get together in person. We can take the temperature down big time. And it was fantastic. They had a very civil meeting. You didn't have the people that were hurling all sorts of, mean things from the comment section or the peanut gallery.
Yeah.
it was productive because the board sat up in front of the owners and it was a face-to-face meeting. We're all people. Let's work on accomplishing goals and completing tasks as opposed to a he said, she said, or let's make this personal. So I think there is a time and a place for virtual meetings. Absolutely. I am a fan
Hmm.
of them, but sometimes it's things get lost in translation or tone sometimes doesn't come across well in written
Absolutely, Omar.
communication. So
Absolutely.
sometimes you can effectively utilize those in-person meetings to better serve the association as a whole.
So
I can go
if I
ahead, Zoe.
may jump in real quick, I think you both said a few key things that I want to highlight. And it boils down to, John, you're so right about the culture, right? I
Hmm.
love how you phrased and framed that to the patina, but like the culture of a community, because every community has
Hmm.
their own culture and the time and place, right? And I think it's being intentional behind the topic too, and understanding if you're discussing something that's rather serious, understanding the timeline of events that are taking place and when to engage residents virtually, even if part of that includes email communication, because that could be part of the communication plan, but understand that that's not sufficient.
Hmm.
So that can also lead to misinformation. That can also lead to tension amongst the community as well, right? Because then you're even more detached, right? Because a virtual meeting can create animosity. Imagine if you're not even attempting to meet virtually with your residents. So I wanted to add that where there's a time and a place, and you should really measure the culture of your community to understand what is needed, as well as the topic at hand is so critical.
It's a great point, Julie, and being strategic and I think purposeful. And I really love that you said that there is time and place. And I think Omar agrees. You have all these opportunities, all these devices, all this communication, but you have to figure out which channel am I going to use and what's going to get my message across. So I really like that you said that there's definitely a time and place to use emails and virtual meetings.
I think we also got to remove ego. There's a lot of ego
Mm,
in HOAs.
that's a big word, Alex.
It is a big word, and I'm going to give you a personal story that just recently happened. I just gotta. Told me I could talk. So we have a CEO of a Fortune 500 company sits on a board, and you watching on CNBC, you watching on TV, the most cool, collect individual ever think, wow. But there's a Facebook page, and Diane, I'm going to get to you because you just reminded me with that question. I see your question here, Diane. All right. And he's getting attacked on a Facebook page, and he fires off these communications. So he's a different person when he's on the board of his home, right, of where he lives, than he is of a publicly traded company. And I told him you can't get emotional. I mean, you got to remove your ego. I know you run this massive company, but you can't let what people are saying here, and a lot of it is false information, right? Because you know what happens in these Facebook pages. They just feed off each other, and the keyboard warriors come in and they start. What people don't realize is that you're actually doing damage to your community by doing this, right? You're setting up you're creating a bad reputation for you're ruining your real estate values. Instead of using it to fix something and communicate clearly, you're using it to actually self-destroy, shoot yourself in the foot and your community by attacking each other. So I actually met with them, and I had to kind of let them know that in this world you can't just fire off like if you're the CEO of this Fortune 500 company, and there's no firing people, there's no documentation. You have to be very, very, very careful how you behave. Also, you're a publicly traded company, so I sat with him and I kind of told him how HOAs work and educated him, and he's kind of set back and he removed his ego, and now he thinks twice before writing something. So if you read something, some of us read things differently, so we might be right. So you have to sometimes just take a step back, take a breather, type it, put it in draft, wait, ask for a recommendation, talk to the rest of your board, right? Talk to your legal, like, what am I going to do here? Don't just fire back. Don't become that keyboard, just everything that's written about you. So remove ego. And I told him, I had to tell him, you have an ego. It's your ego that's doing this for you, because I know you are CEO of this Fortune 500 company, but it's different. So
Good
if
for
you
you.
remove
Talk
your
about
ego,
difficult conversations, because I'm sure
Absolutely.
that's a difficult conversation to have, but you're so right. I think we've all been in situations where we've had to draft something and walk away. but also the component of working with different individuals that are in different capacities, right? So I'm sure,
Mhm.
Omar, in your environment, I know in the management side, John, I'm sure you have a million examples, but in your environment, Omar, from your perspective, I'm sure you can give us a few great scenarios where that applies. Because like I said, it's a big word, but I'm sure that it holds true time and time again.
Absolutely. And so, what I would add to Alex's comments are I see this all the time, and my perspective on it is a little bit different because when it gets escalated to the attorney, you all are on the front lines, right?
Mhm.
Board members,
Mhm.
managers, and then ultimately, if it's bad enough, it may get escalated to me and to my desk. And what I always say, or one of the common refrains that I'll say is, you know, it's not worth getting in it back and forth with this individual because that will be an endless back and forth. There are people out there, and you all probably know the owners I'm referring to, where they love nothing more than for this to be an endless back and forth that spans days or even months. Um, it's almost like this is their Super Bowl. They want to win this personal battle against you. And all the time you're creating a written record. And me, I'm wearing my legal hat. That's
Right.
where I'm always concerned about exposure, right? So
Sure.
is it worth it to engage with someone and potentially open the association up to exposure just so you can say, I beat this person or I won this battle? It's a battle it's just not worth trying to win that.
Mhm.
So I think it's almost better to take the high road, and maybe this will dovetail with the question in the Q&A, which is asking about Facebook groups. Boards can get in trouble if they're in the comment section of the official or unofficial Facebook group. So my standard advice, again, this is my legal perspective on things, is stay off the unofficial pages. Don't debate the owners in writing there. Anything a board types, the internet is forever. Anything that a board member types can resurface at a later date, and we never want to see that resurface in some form of litigation where it's going to come back to bite us. So if the association runs an official Facebook page, I usually say, let's keep that, no comments on it, turn the comments off. It's purely for informational purposes only and announcements. Again, my perspective is I get that some people want more transparency, but we have to balance that with creating exposure for the association or allowing misinformation to run rampant based on owner comments on an official or unofficial channel.
It's a great point you make, Omar. There's an old saying, with great power comes great responsibility. So we have all this communication power in today's world, but we have to have greater responsibility. So you're right. If you're just casually responding to something on a Facebook, group chat, is that going to come back and be admissible? And I think as residents and even as property management leaders, we all have to take a greater responsibility on how we communicate and what we choose to put out there.
Right. There's a fine balance, right? I think that's part of something that we probably should spend a little time discussing is the balance between that over communication. There are boards that at times feel that they have to make the residents aware of every single transaction or that and it's not necessarily that the residents shouldn't be aware of everything that's happening in the association or that communication isn't critical. But again, there's a balance between how much information is placed out there before even decisions are made because it can be misunderstood and it can then become a problem for the association. So if John or Omar, you could talk a little bit more about what that looks like for associations at times and how it could even become a liability.
I would say, Zoe, sending out communication is you want to be consistent in whatever process, right? So, I don't want to delegate something out and say, hey, we're going to do that this week and then not do it the next week. So an example would be if you're putting together a weekly newsletter that you have that inside your community, you want to be consistent with that, meaning you want to send it on a consistent day at a consistent time, and you want to send it out weekly so that residents can look forward to this. So you don't want to be spotty with any communication, especially if you're using words like recap or weekly or updates. So my first goal with all of our property teams is whatever type of communication pattern we're going to create, let's have consistency.
And
So I just received a text from that individual as I was speaking, I guess, on the webinar. And he says, can you tell him how you fixed it, Alex? Explain how. Um, so what I ended up doing with this individual, the CEO, is I I scheduled a meeting between the Facebook individuals that were firing off the comments and this individual, and we sat in a room and we had a face-to-face dialogue. And you'll be surprised how much easier it is when you deal with someone face-to-face and you see their expressions and you're looking in their face and you see the paperwork and what's going on. And people are able to understand more than sitting back and reading a text or a comment online. So he says, things have gotten better ever since that meeting, and everybody's on the same page. And I think the community now is trying to work together instead of, tearing each other apart with comments. They're trying to work together as how do we fix it? How do we fix the challenges we're having at the property? So he had just texted me now asking, please tell him how you fixed the issue. And thank you. And it works when you go face to face.
I think
So,
that's
Great.
that's a great outcome.
Yeah.
So I'm
Yeah.
glad to hear there was a happy ending to this because from my perspective on this, when people are responding online or it's just less personal when you're communicating electronically, you're almost performing for an audience, right? So you may have that one owner that's they want to debate with you because they have this constituents or this group of owners that they feel as though they're standing up for. And in reality, if you can just meet with them in person, Alex, like you suggested, they're a completely different person, right? So it's like,
Mhm.
you can't even believe that that's the same exact person that was hurling insults at you and saying all sorts of crazy things online, but then you have this face-to-face meeting and all that ego, all of that is set to the side, and all of a sudden you can have a productive discussion. So, and then one thing, just because this has kind of jogged my memory on some things and some of the war stories I've been through. Um, Twice in the last 18 months or so, including once within the last 4 weeks, I've dealt with an owner that's very aggressive electronically, right? Posting all sorts of things, borderline on defamation, making accusations about, kickbacks and money being stolen to the current board, posting anonymously within the community, all sorts of things. Ultimately, he hired an attorney, demanded that an annual meeting be held so that he could get his candidates onto the board. The association spent anytime they're talking to me, the meter's running, right? So they're spending legal fees on this, and they're just playing defense against these baseless accusations. And so ultimately, we talked to the board and we're like, let's just proceed with this annual meeting. No harm, no foul. Let's give him what we want, what he wants, just so we can move on. We went through countless time, energy, and effort on this, only for this person to initially throw their hat in the ring to run and then completely back out. So it was completely performative. They spent all this money and now he's not even running for the board. And I've had that happen multiple times where it's, chaos is the desired result.
Mhm.
It's not actually
Sure.
want to serve on the board. And I respect all the board members out there. You all are volunteers. You're putting in your volunteer hours. I get paid for this. This is my full-time job. But they just want to sow chaos. And that's the end result or the end goal there. So it's unfortunate, but hopefully by the end of the seminar, we have a couple tools to help combat or deal with some of these. And I think Alex has already presented one, which is let's take this to an in-person conversation.
Omar, you make a great point because I think as a property management team, when a conflict arises, you want to start applying de-escalation. So, face-to-face meeting is an effort of de-escalation, right? Having the property manager, let's be specific, set a meeting with that resident, whether it's a phone call, right, or face-to-face, but not over an email, and trying to apply de-escalation. I think what we try to do as a property management team is create this reasonable effort. So before we get to the point where we have to call someone in your position, call the properties association's attorney, we want to try to apply these face-to-face moments of de-escalation or reasonable efforts, right? Try to find out what the issue is. And then most of the time, can the property management team help solve the solution before it gets to the attorney? Because I think we all agree when it gets there, sometimes it's harder to come back to the table when you've gotten that far, right? And that's where egos can sometimes be inflamed. So that's why ultimately, when a problem comes up, how I lead and how I lead through our property managers is we want to assume responsibility first on the property for whatever problems take place. And if there's resident issues. We owe them that respect. We owe them communication. They are a resident of our community. We manage their community, so we should engage them when they have a conflict.
And John, I think one of the words you just said, I think is the key word is communicate. I found that, and I'm interested to hear your perspective on this as well, but I think communication is critical here. And it can serve to de-escalate, it can serve many purposes. So you don't have to immediately jump to the in-person meeting. If you simply acknowledge receipt of the email saying, thanks for your email, I'm looking into this and I'm working with the board on this, or we'll bring this to the board's attention and the board will discuss it at their next meeting. I think that's key, because a lot of times people just want to be heard. And I can't tell you how many times, because the board doesn't acknowledge an email or management doesn't acknowledge an email, people will read into that and
Absolutely.
they'll interpret the silence, and then their mind goes to, oh, something nefarious is going on, or they're trying to ignore me, or there's some
They feel
cover up going on.
dismissed, right?
They're being dismissed. So oftentimes just simply acknowledging the email and saying, we're working on this, we'll get back to you, will buy time and allow you to assess this. You don't have to drop everything immediately and tackle this issue, but it
Sure.
allow the owner to feel heard. Sometimes a little bit of space and distance allows people to think about things more rationally, so it can accomplish that as well. But then I do think that there is a follow-through aspect that's critical as well. So you can't just say, confirming receipt of your email and we'll get back to you, and then never get back to people, because that's
Right.
just going to re-inflame the situation. So I think in terms of the tools in your tool belt, communication, but then there needs to be some sort of follow-through in the end.
You are spot on, Omar. Acknowledgement is key. And I have seen that. And I have seen that personally when our team or any property manager has acknowledged an issue within 24 hours or 48 hours, I've started to see it de-escalate. But you're exactly right. There needs to be a conclusion to that. So acknowledgement is just the first step. But I completely agree with you. And I think as leaders, it's our responsibility to like I said, to engage. And sometimes these messages come to us at the beginning of the day, at the end of the day, sometimes after hours. But we have that responsibility, especially from property managers, is when we receive that message to provide acknowledgement or information back within, a respectable business time, because that resident, as I said, they deserve a response.
I think what I would add to that is, and usually what we find, and being in the industry for many years as well, is that no matter the topic that we're talking about, and sometimes it could be a capital project or it could be something very simple. At the end of the day, what tends to break down, to your point, Omar, is the communication. And sometimes behind that is the clarity around the expectation, right, of the process, right? And so, and usually it's because when decisions are being made, historically, the decision is being made to resolve a specific matter. What's underestimated is the impact that will have on one or masses of individuals, right? And there's an emotional component that I think we've generally speaking in history underestimated, because again, John, to your point, we're talking about homes. This is very personal for our residents in our communities. We're taking care of your homes. It can't get any more personal than what we're talking about now, right? So I think when we're planning on executing anything that you're working on, the communication plan is almost as critical as the project itself, because that is going to personally impact them as well when they want to hear and understand and know what's happening. And they need an opportunity to ask questions. They need an opportunity to vent their grievances, whatever it is. It is so important that when we are working on executing a plan, that we also incorporate time for that communication plan, because usually that's what tends to create a kind of a left turn to the entire process. And then it ends up being a time waster for everyone, because now you're talking about, we start to get dismissed on things that had nothing to do with the original plan. So with that said, Omar, I have a question for you. Is it common to see associations that create a communication policy whether it's for for board meetings or just in general for the community to follow, just so that there's like behavior or how to conduct yourself at a board meeting, etc.
I'd say I see it from time to time, but I think I'm recommending it more and more. Just because a lot of times, so last night I was at a board meeting and I give what I call a board member boot camp, which is basically an hour-long seminar where I'll explain to boards, here are some tools or here's some techniques for conducting board business effectively, efficiently, and without creating undue legal exposure. And I think a lot of that is some of it's actual legal advice, and other portions are just dealing with personalities, right? And how do we make the owners feel heard? At the end of the day, the board is elected by the owners. They're making decisions on behalf of the owners, but the owners want to feel as though they're not being outright dismissed. Even though the buck stops with the board, they're the ultimate decision makers. There's an art to, not outright dismissing owners, giving them the opportunity to vent, even if the board is going to do the exact opposite and they've spent countless hours researching a topic. You want to allow those people to feel heard, show that you're actively listening. You shouldn't have the board, have their back turned to the owners during the meeting or anything like that. I think there's presentation, presence, ego, all of that needs to be set to the side. Engage with the owners, let them know, active listening, you're looking at them, eye contact, nodding your head, acknowledging their presence, they're valuable members of the community. So I think that goes a long way towards allowing the board to accomplish goals without being sidetracked, because what you don't want is the board to make a decision and then the owners to feel as though they're completely dismissed. They send all sorts of demands. They hire an attorney, and next thing you know, the board management and the attorney are all on this wild goose chase addressing owner comments and concerns that could have been avoided if a different approach to the situation had been taken at the outset.
Great points, Omar.
Absolutely.
Great points. Absolutely. We do something similar. We call it a board orientation. And in that orientation, we go over governance. And I think a lot of that falls under governance, because you nailed some really incredible points there about respecting a board's opinion and how a board should respect a resident's opinion. I loved how you talked about how they are elected from the residents, from the community. So that does give them an opportunity to govern. But a lot of our boards are made up of very successful people that have been successful in their careers, but there's still an opportunity for them to learn on how to properly govern and for governance. So we provide certain skills and really talk about our relationship for how we support the board from a property management company to help them so that they can govern effectively, that their meetings are positive. And I think doing a boot camp and we do our orientation, it doesn't stop right there. When we have our one-on-ones or, when we have our conversations with our boards, we try to do that. We try to remind them, especially when a property manager works with the board president, right? How the board president sets the tone for the rest of the board. Those are really key meetings because we take those one-on-ones with our board presidents as some of the most important meetings we have on property, that week or month.
I think the phrase you used, set the tone. I like that. If you set the tone, it can just cause things to, or it makes things, everything flows down from the board, right?
Sure.
The board comes into a meeting calm, respectful, not raising your voice. I think people will match that intensity or less, right? Whereas if there's an owner that is coming in screaming and the board says, well, I'm not going to take this and I'm going to match this person's intensity and it results in a shouting match, that doesn't make anyone look good. It certainly doesn't make the board look good. And that's what people are going to remember. People are going to forget about the owner that escalated this or who was the instigator. And people are going to remember the board's reaction saying, oh man, that was not what I was expecting, and that may cause people to feel as though they can't raise concerns with the board, or they're going to go off and try to counter the board's actions or overthrow them, and none of that is productive. At the end of the day, I think we want people all rowing in the same direction. So going back to setting the tone comment, if we can, a lot of this, I think, in my opinion, can be avoided if the board at the outset, similar to kind of what we did at the seminar today. It's like set the ground rules at the beginning. Oh, you can submit your questions in the Q&A. So I like to always say, board meetings are for purposes of conducting board business. we want to hear from you owners, and we've reserved an owner forum. It's during this portion of the agenda, and here's how many minutes it's for, right? And I like to put a time limit on it because if you don't, you may be there all night. You may find yourself it's 10 p.m. and you haven't gotten to anything because the owners have been airing their grievances for 3 hours. So I like to, if you have those ground rules up front, I don't think
Hmm.
people are going to fault you if you say, "Hey, we set 30 minutes for this. We're at 30 minutes. Now we need to move on." So I think there's just a way to manage the situation where the board's getting done what it needs to get done. You're hearing from the owners and soliciting their input.
Hmm.
It's not endless inputs. You're there all night.
It's a
Great
great
point.
point. And I there's a tool for all boards. It's Robert Rules of Order, right? It's there for you and it's suggested. So especially when we do these orientations, we go over a little bit of Robert Rules and we encourage board members to take a look at that. And I love that idea. That's how every board meeting should start with let's reintroduce what the rules are, right? Even when a board is looking out in the crowd and goes, "Oh, it looks like we had the same residents attending from last board meeting." There's no harm in just reintroducing what the rules are going to be, right? Setting the tone, setting the guidelines. That helps everyone in the room online understand, okay, there needs to be a level of decorum so we can get through this meeting successfully.
We have a
Uh,
few questions online. I'll start from the bottom here. Thank you, Elaine. Can owners comment during the topics on the agenda, or do owners have to wait until the end after the topic has been debated and voted on? Omar, would you like to take that one?
Sure, I'll take that one. So my take on this is that word I just or that sentence I just said, board meetings are for board business only. So I like the board to make a decision and then you can hear from the owners at the end. But if you invite owner input, let's say you're voting on a landscaping contract and the board says, before we vote, let's hear from the owners. That's a surefire way to find someone passionate in the audience, and next thing you know, they're debating the merits of a landscaping contract for 2 hours. So,
Mhm.
just my perspective is I like the board to make the decision that you can solicit owner input during a designated forum or during a designated time period, but not interspersed within the actual agenda itself.
Great. It's a great tip, Omar. So stay to the agenda. And I know boards will work with us on their agenda and we'll try to find that. And it's the information's right there for them. Sometimes, when you're in the room, maybe it's a well-attended in-person meeting, there's a little nervousness. The end of the day is that if we stay on our agenda, we can get through that. And I love that you say that because I myself will encourage boards to let's follow the agenda and let's go from there. And if we're pivoting, okay, let's get back to the process of the agenda.
And it's natural to pivot. There's going to be instances where you deviate from that agenda. That's perfectly fine. I think there's an art to explaining to owners that, we're not trying to silence you all in the audience. We're trying to get through this agenda. We do have, again, going back to the ground rules at the top, just point owners to the fact that there is a time and a place where we're going to hear from you all. But we need to get through our agenda, so we're not trying to silence you. So there is a balance because what you want to avoid is owners feeling as though they're not being heard or the board's not being transparent or the board's making these decisions without any input from the owners and you're supposed to represent these owners yet you don't want to hear from us. So I think there's a art trying to walk that fine line between we don't want to hear from every single owner and have every single owner vote on every single line item or expenditure and conducting things efficiently. There's like a happy medium that I think can be reached.
Great point.
yeah, and I,
Great
and I
point.
think if you're voting on a landscaping contract, you probably had a committee prior, so that individual was involved in the committee where there was discussions happening the last 30, 45 days. What we want to do. Do we want to change quarterly flowers? Do we want to cut the coconut trees right before hurricane season? Right. So, Elaine, maybe that individual, if they're gonna make a comment before the vote, probably should have been involved prior with those discussions or been on a committee and involved and making recommendations to the board later. Right. And I think that's how you engage the community, right? When we're going to do something, someone that's very passionate maybe about landscaping and they want to make a comment, let's put them on a committee and let's help. They're so passionate about landscape, help us find the best way of, signing a good contract with landscape and doing a better job.
And
So,
You make a great point, Alex. I think if you have a community that is engaged and enthusiastic
yeah,
about being on committees, right? That's a wonderful thing to have. We have a lot of our communities, they have passionate committee members,
yeah,
residents that are involved. And I do agree with you. They do seem to have a better understanding of what is going on the property and some of the decisions they're making because they may sit on that committee or they may have a friend on another committee. So the more engagement they have in the process of running the property, right, or the association, I think the more information they have. I find now it's not 100%, statement there. I want to say that there are certain points where it doesn't, but most of the time they understand more of what's going on
and
when they're engaged.
one thing I would add to both Alex and John's points are, oftentimes, especially if there's a committee involved, but oftentimes when a board is voting on something, it's not as though they're looking at this for the first time during that meeting. There's
Exactly.
countless time and maybe multiple people's time that has been spent on this to get to the point where the board feels comfortable voting. So sure, the owners may have a great point that they want to bring up, but oftentimes the board has analyzed this from many, many different angles before they even get to that meeting. They're sitting down in front of the owners. So there's sometimes maybe a disconnect between the owner and the owners and the boards where the owners think that the board is just making a snap decision or a snap judgment on something without having done their due diligence. But I have an incredible amount of respect for board members that are spending so much time and energy and effort behind the scenes. It's not a glorifying job, it's not glamorous whatsoever, but there is a lot more work that goes in behind the scenes than I think people realize.
it's great. I'm gonna give you a quick story of a breakdown of communication I had recently. So someone sent me an email and I responded, I'll have it to you by end of day tomorrow. Right? End of day
Yeah.
tomorrow. 5 p.m. Tomorrow came and the person asked me, where's my information? Well, there's a miscommunication, right? Because I put end of day. End of day for that individual is 5 p.m. End of day for me is 11:59 p.m. Right? Before midnight.
Sure.
Because the day's
Sure.
not over yet for me,
Sure.
right?
Yeah,
So,
you're right.
and when we talk about breakdown communication, you could see how people could read things differently or communicate differently. So I called this individual and I said, I apologize, I meant end of day. And he understood. So now the joke is I'll have it to you by 11:59 p.m. Tomorrow. But it's a joke now. But so it's an example of how people read emails and there's breakdown communication. So if somebody emails you, what is the proper response time
Mhm.
in your opinion? Is it 24 hours? Is it same day? Is it end of day? Right? What is end of day? What is the proper time, including text messages? Because we've gotten very big on text messaging, right?
Mhm. Yes.
A lot of people expect text messages to be respond faster because I will get the same email and then the same text message sometimes. And the same communication coming in just differently. Hey, I sent you an email. Look at your email.
Immediate response expectations
Yeah.
is probably a comment or a question to be talked about as well, right?
Yeah.
Related to expectation.
What are both of you seeing out there?
That's a great. Can I defer to my friend Omar? I'm actually really interested. I don't want to put him on the spot. Really want to hear it.
Yeah.
I have an
Let's
answer,
put
but I
Omar
really,
on the spot.
Put me on
I
the
really
spot.
do want to hear from our attorney on the call here.
So my technique on this is, so we have a firm policy is response within 2 business days, right? For, a full response within 2 business days. I personally like to confirm the receipt of the email. And so people know that I'm working on it and I've gotten the email. And if I need more than the 2 business days, I try to set that expectation. Going back to one of our themes from earlier, I found that communication is key, right? I'd rather over communicate and send a quick one-line email saying, hey, I'm out of the office or I'm backed up. Can I get this to you 3 days from now? Because then people understand I've received it, I'm working on it, I haven't gone radio silent. And I think my perspective on this shifted when I had my own attorney for something. And when I didn't hear from him for a few days, I was like, what's going on? Like, did he get my email? Like, and I'm reading into things. So I think that helped me understand that sometimes it's that quick little one-liner, like a intermediate response will allow people, will put people at ease, know that it's being worked on. That said, there are some instances where an immediate response is necessary. I love it when people will utilize the high importance tag in the correct way, right? So I have some people that tag every single message high importance. I'm not particularly a fan of that because I treat every message as being important. But if you need a same day response, do something to get my attention, and I'll do my best, schedule permitting, to get you that immediate response. However, I've also found that some people may find something to be, in their mind, an emergency. And in my mind, I don't necessarily think that's an emergency. And I will try to explain, like, hey, I'm working on this. I see it. I see you think this is time sensitive. I think this can wait till tomorrow. So, John, I think it's just
Yeah.
being overly communicative with individuals that you're managing and setting expectations, because what we want to avoid is people, you haven't responded, and then you get a follow-up message and then a follow-up angry message. One of my partners says that, and maybe this dates back to the initial question that Alex posed to me about what I'm seeing out there, is people think that we attorneys are like vending machines. You just punch in the code and you get the immediate response, right? Sometimes I can give you a quick response. Sometimes I need to research it. And it takes a little bit more time and thinking than just firing off a quick email. So I think there's a technique to manage people's expectations, set clear expectations, and also get them a response in a timely manner. But what I'd avoid, if there's one takeaway from this long-winded answer, it's probably try to communicate. Radio silence is just gonna, people will misinterpret that radio silence and just expect or think the worst.
Great. I thought it was a purposeful answer. It's absolutely not long-winded. I want to make sure you know that.
Thank you.
When we are aligned, and I was really interested to get your perspective. To me, 48 hours. When it's going past 48 hours, I think you're entering some territory you don't want to be in. And what I try to also do is I try to use some, as you were talking about, emotional intelligence. When I'm reading an email, I'm trying to, is this something that seems incredibly important to this person that I need to escalate this or prioritize this? So especially now, very, very similar approach, Omar. When I get an email from a resident directly to me and my name is used, John, comma, then I take that as this is a priority. My sole purpose is involved with residents. I work in property management. If I don't have residents, I can't manage the property. So immediately I immediately prioritize that. But I will tell you personally, if I'm outside that 24 hour and I'm creeping into 48 hours, I personally feel like, ooh, I'm a little late on this, right? Because I'd love to respond within 24 hours, but I don't let it go on further than 48. But I don't really want to be in that 48 hour territory when it comes to resident, to be honest with you. Unless, like you said, unless there needs to be some research done, right? And I need to gather some information. So you talked about earlier about saying that acknowledgement. So maybe I'd put that in my first acknowledgement email, like, hey, I'm going to start this, and it's going to take some time because I need to pull other resources to get you that answer.
I think that you bring up some fantastic points. And I think the key to all of this is just that, and believe me, I've made mistakes and I've been guilty of it in not following what I'm suggesting here. And sometimes I'm like, if I just spent 10 seconds sending a quick email, all of this could have been avoided. So I'm learning as I go too, especially as people, I think we're in a more and more connected day and age where, I feel as though my phone's vibrate. I have like a phantom phone vibration where I think it's always vibrating now. And I'm
Probably because
constantly
it is, because mine
Yeah.
is too.
Yeah. So
Same
like,
here.
I'm
It is.
constantly checking it. I can't even like, if I go without my phone for 15 seconds to take the trash out, it's like, I struggle for those 15 seconds. So in today's day and age, we're very, very connected. And I think there's some techniques we can use to send responses in a timely fashion so that people feel as though they're being heard. Because if you don't respond, people may feel as though they're not being heard. Next thing you know, a tiny issue that could have been solved with that 10-second email I'm referring to, at least buying time, spirals out of control. And then you're spending much more time addressing a mountain is made out of a molehill.
Sure, sure. That's a great point. And Zuli talked a little bit earlier about community culture. So when it comes to a management team, having that communication culture, so you can't be the only one in the office that operates like that. Hey, I have a 24-hour or 48-hour check-in. Your entire team needs to operate in that that culture and needs to know when to escalate things appropriately. So I find when it comes to our leadership is we try to get all of our team that have email accounts and that residents have access to follow those same guidelines. 24 hours is the goal, no longer than 48. Make sure you acknowledge emails. Don't let anything go past 48 hours. And I think if everyone on the team who's involved in resident communication operates like that, I think it takes the stress off your top property leaders, to be honest with you.
100%. If you can establish that, I think that's fantastic. And then you'll build a great reputation, along those lines. And, some things I've seen, and this may be more relevant for board members, but if there's a board email address, it may be helpful to have an automatic reply saying, thank you for your email. The board will review and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. Just something like that, because even more so for board members, you all are volunteers. You're not always wearing your board hat. So, there may be times where, and this may be most of the time, where when you're taking your dog for a walk, you don't want to be approached by an owner with a complaint about the association. And moreover, you can't make a representation on behalf of the association because the board operates by majority vote and you're just one board member. So I think one thing to consider for boards is, perhaps an automatic response on that email. And then just over time, you almost have to train your ownership in terms of how responses are handled. And as much as the board would love to drop everything immediately and get you that immediate response, there's a process that needs to be followed. Sometimes the board needs to follow with management, its attorney, its accountant, whoever. And don't read into that silence as the board ignoring you. It's just behind the scenes, things need to be worked on. So if you can just communicate saying, we're working on this, or here's the automatic reply, we'll get back to you as soon as possible, I think that goes a long way.
I think you just said something that I want to highlight. Well, a few things, and because those can tend to create conflict. But at the bottom line to that is the consistency behind the process in any organization and any association, whether it's at the board level, the management level, or collaboration between the two is from a communication perspective, whether it's the prioritization at the board level or the actions that are being taken. It's just consistency. So the tone in which a community operates, which speaks to the culture, it speaks to how they communicate, it speaks to whether the community, the board is listening, or the management team, if we're listening to understand, right? If we're trying to identify the root cause of concerns, if we're solution focused, right? Because these are all things that, while we didn't really speak to those individually, we spoke around all of those topics by providing examples. Those are all things that individually tend to create conflict in communities because the residents or even the boards, sometimes those dynamics exist amongst the board and they spill over into the community. And that does tend to also spill over into the culture of the community, and it creates that conflict. So it's important that there's consistency behind good communication, clear communication, consistent communication, and clarity behind the actions that are being taken in each and every association. These are all tips that we've talked about today. I am going to check in on time because I know we're running close to that time, and I know that we probably have a few more questions that we want to ask Alex. I don't know if you want to take it over. And then some closing comments as well.
Here's a question from Elaine. What is the policy for property managers to send blast email notices to residents, such as an issue about a repair matter, and when will it be repaired?
Great question. I'll let Omar take any of the legal point of view, but really, I talked about this earlier about updates, sending a weekly update, right? Project updates, before and after pictures. So I think it depends, to answer the question, depends on the property. But I would say providing maintenance updates, however a community decides to communicate that out, it needs to include visuals and it needs to be consistent. And also I would say remove any language that provides, that provides any liability, right? Strip that up. You just want to provide what was being addressed, what was fixed. And, obviously it's a positive outcome if you're communicating it out. Maybe if the job isn't even completed, you're offering an update on it's pending, right? But I think you got to be strategic and purposeful. So when it comes to the legality, obviously, I think Omar can provide some standpoint on what you should and should not say.
I like the word used of strategic and purposeful. So
Excellent.
I think each of these should be treated on a case by case basis. And so right now, literally right now, this week, I can't tell you how many emails I've gotten about an association that's found itself on the Fannie Mae blacklist, which is maybe Alex, maybe that should have been one of my responses. That could be a whole nother seminar, um,
Yes,
which is
agreed.
associations that seemingly with increasing frequency are finding themselves in the Fannie Mae blacklist. And I'm getting contacted by an owner that's trying to sell their unit and the sale won't go through because there's pending litigation, there's all sorts of violations, and they're turning to me saying, "What can you share with me?" Right? And I have to give them a very vanilla response because I don't want to over disclose and do something that's going to create exposure for the association. Because think about it this way, if I over disclose, that has the possibility of negatively impacting the outgoing owner, right, who's selling their unit. And if I underdisclose, the incoming owner could come into a situation and say, "Hey, why I didn't know about this when I bought the unit." So I think there's a fine line to balance where we'd love to be open book and explain everything that's going on, but oftentimes boards will turn to their legal counsel for guidance on what are we legally required to disclose. Not what can we disclose or what should we disclose or what information is available to disclose. What are we legally required to disclose? That's the line in the sand that's drawn. And it's not to be difficult. We'd love to, just be open books and say, here's all the information. But
Great
we
point.
also need to be cognizant of the exposure that doing so may create. So I kind of answered the question and then built on top of it with kind of a practical example of why sometimes less is more.
Great point.
Agreed. I think if it's a quality of
Love
life
that.
issue at the property, it should be updated daily, right? Because you're coming to the building, you're coming home, you're going somewhere, AC's out, elevator's out, maybe the gate's not working, something, right? People want to know what's happening because they're seeing it every day. If it's just updates, events going on, maybe weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, could work depending on the community, what kind of community, the characteristics of the community, right?
It's a
So,
great point, Alex. Like,
yeah.
and if you live in a gated community, entering and if there's an issue with entering and leaving your property, I would want a daily update, right?
Yes.
On if there was any type of issue there. So it's a case by case, and you're absolutely right. The elevator is
Safety.
huge.
Mhm.
Elevator safety. I love the way you said life and safety. Those require maybe not even daily, maybe every few hours you're providing an update because especially if you know that's going to impact residents' life and safety. So I'm really glad you brought that point up.
Yeah. Leah, I hope that answered your question there.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah,
That's
because
such a good.
if you're just sending daily or every other day communication about the community, your readership, your viewership is going to drop because it's just going to fall into spam. Yeah, right. So you want to make sure that your communication is strategic depending on what it is and the severity of it. And so just we all see the emails and you see too many of the same first and you stop reading them. All right. All right. We got a minute here left. Omar, final thoughts.
Final thoughts are, and I'll do 30 seconds, then we'll give John 30 seconds. So I think that if there's any takeaways from this, it's that communication is key, and there's a fine line to balance between transparency and not overexposing the association. But sometimes taking a little bit of extra time in communicating, or I'd rather over communicate than under communicate, because I think the under communication is what leads people to contact me with a legal issue that's, reached the court system or needs my involvement.
Good point. John?
Great. For me, property management is about persistence. It's about strong communication. It's about building connections with your residents and also with your team. And it's a nonstop job. So every day that you come into the property as a property management team member, you have to have those things in mind. And you have to strive for excellence every day. And if you are consistent and persistent, and we talked about it being purposeful and strategic, you will build strong communication and you will be able to mitigate conflict.
Amazing.
Good.
Just remember, it's community living. You're living with other human beings. Keep it respectful. Keep the dialogues open. Communicate your and you'll get a lot further than screaming at each other and sending, verbal threats and becoming a keyboard warrior, right? Just keep it respectful. This is your neighbor. These are the people you live with. This is where your family lives. This is where your dogs and cats live. So just keep it respectful. It's easy, and keep the emotions out of it and just stick to business, in my opinion.
Great point.
All right. Thank you,
Good.
everyone. Thank you for joining us, gentlemen. It was a pleasure having you today. We
Thank
look
you,
forward to
John
seeing
and
you
Omar.
next month at the
Thank
next
you.
webinar.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye-bye,
everyone.
everyone.
Bye,
Bye.
everybody.